Story 1. When I worked at Knott's Berry Farm as a ride operator, I thought I'd seen it all. Laughing kids, screaming teenagers, exhausted parents. The usual chaos of an amusement park. But Camp Snoopy was different. People whispered about it. "You ever heard about Molly?" they'd ask, like it was some initiation into an unofficial club of those who'd experienced the unexplainable. I didn't pay much attention to the rumors, that is until I met her. It was late one evening, my shift just wrapping up. The sun had set, and the park was settling into that eerie, still quiet it gets after closing. I was in charge of the kids' coaster that night. You know the one, small dips, slow turns, a tame ride meant for laughter, not thrills. My job was simple: clear the ride, do the final checks, lock everything up, and go home. I stood by the control panel, flipping switches to power everything down. The laughter and chatter of guests had long faded, leaving only the hum of the park's distant generators. I let out a tired sigh and turned to leave, glancing back one last time to make sure everything looked normal. That's when I saw her. A little girl, no older than 8 or 9, darted across the pathway and bolted toward the coaster. Her dress fluttered as she moved, and her long hair seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the lampposts. Hey, kid!" I yelled, panic creeping into my voice. "The ride's closed! You can't be here!" She didn't stop, didn't even look at me. She ran straight for the stairs leading up to the loading dock. My heart dropped. I wasn't just worried about safety. This was my job on the line. If a guest got hurt after hours, it'd be on me. I sprinted after her, my boots clanging against the metal steps. "Kid, I'm serious. You can't—" She disappeared. I froze mid-step, my breath caught in my throat. She had been just a few feet ahead of me. I saw her reach the top of the stairs, turn toward the dock, and then nothing. The platform was empty. I stood there, my chest heaving, staring at the spot where she should have been. My mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe she'd slipped past me somehow. Maybe she jumped down. I leaned over the railing, scanning the ground below. Nothing. And then I heard it, a soft giggle. It wasn't playful. It wasn't sweet. It was faint, almost distant, like it was coming from the shadows. My skin prickled as the sound echoed through the empty park. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. I hated how weak I sounded, but something about that laugh, it wasn't right. I stepped onto the dock, my eyes darting around. The moonlight cast long shadows across the platform, making every corner seem darker than it should have been. The air felt heavier, colder. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. One of the coaster's cars shifted, just a little. The ride was powered down, locked in place, yet the car had moved as if someone had climbed inside. My stomach churned. I approached slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. "All right, this isn't funny," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. I reached the car and peered inside. Empty. Of course, it was empty. But as I straightened up, something caught my attention. A single handprint on the seat. Small, smudged, and damp, as if someone had pressed their hand into the fabric just moments before. I backed away, my legs unsteady. "Okay, I'm done," I whispered. "I'm done. This isn't happening." I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, the ride's lights flickered on. My heart stopped. The control panel was yards away, and the keys were in my pocket. There was no way the lights could have turned on by themselves. And then the ride started. The coaster lurched forward with a metallic groan, the cars rattling along the track. I stood there frozen in place, watching in disbelief as the empty cars made their way up the first incline. No, I stammered, fumbling with my keys as I rushed to the panel. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I shoved the key into the slot, twisting it frantically to shut everything down. The ride stopped. The lights went out. The hum of machinery died, leaving me in suffocating silence. I leaned against the panel, trying to steady my breathing. "What the hell?" I muttered, wiping sweat from my brow. And then I felt it, a tug on my shirt. It was gentle, almost childlike, but it was enough to send me stumbling forward. I spun around expecting to see someone, anyone, but there was nothing. Just the empty dock and the faint rustle of the wind. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice breaking. This isn't funny. The giggle came again, louder this time, and so close it felt like it was right next to my ear. I bolted. I didn't care about procedure, didn't care about locking up. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was out of Camp Snoopy and halfway across the park. When I finally reached the employee break room, I collapsed into a chair, my heart racing. A few coworkers looked at me, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. "You okay, man?" one of them asked. I shook my head, unable to find the words. But then another coworker, a veteran of the park, gave me a knowing look. "You saw her, didn't you?" I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Molly," he said, leaning back in his chair. "She's been around for years, likes to mess with the rides after hours. You'll get used to it." "Used to it?" I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. She's not," he shrugged. "She's harmless, just a kid. But yeah, she likes the trucks and the kids coast her the most. Next time, just say goodnight to her. She usually listens." I didn't sleep that night. Story 2, I've always hated mornings. The park opened at 10 a.m., but for first shift, we had to be there by 5 a.m. to prep. The air always felt damp that early, clinging to my clothes, and the eerie quietness of an empty amusement park never sat right with me. It's like you could feel the place breathing, waiting for the crowds. I used to think it was my imagination. I don't anymore. My job was routine. Run the coaster, check the brakes, ensure no debris was on the tracks. Simple, right? That morning, I was assigned to the Thunder Beast, the park's main attraction, a steel roller coaster that towered over everything else. It was notorious for its insane drops and sharp turns, and people came from miles away just to ride it. I always thought it had a personality of its own, almost like it was alive. The sun wasn't even up when I started the dry runs. A few groundskeepers were scattered across the park, cleaning and trimming the greenery. I recognized one of them. Mitch, I think his name was. He always wore those noise-canceling headphones, blasting whatever music he was into that week. It made him stand out. He worked with this rhythm, almost like he was in a trance. He didn't see me when I waved that morning. He never saw me again. The first few runs were normal. The train of cars zipped around the track, screeching through the turns, the wheels grinding against the steel. I stood at the control panel, sipping coffee, fighting to stay awake. On the fourth run, I noticed something weird. As the coaster disappeared into the far loop, I heard a sound. Sharp, metallic, like a scream almost, but not human. I wrote it off. Machines make noise. It's part of the job. But when the train came back into view, something wasn't right. The front car was dented. A jagged smear of something dark streaked across it. My stomach flipped. It wasn't grease or oil. It was red, thick and unmistakable. My hand froze over the emergency stop button. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe an animal? Birds sometimes roosted under the tracks. That had to be it. I didn't want to look, but I had to. My legs carried me toward the loading platform as the coaster hissed to a halt. The red streak glistened in the dim morning light, and there were fragments. Small, unrecognizable pieces lodged into the front car, like shrapnel. My stomach churned. "Mitch!" I yelled, turning toward the groundskeepers. I didn't see him at first. The others were scattered too far away. That's when I saw his rake lying near the tracks. I don't remember running over there. It's a blur, like my brain was trying to protect me from what was coming. The air felt wrong, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. When I got to the spot, I froze. There was a mess, an impact zone if you could call it that. Blood splattered the grass, tiny pieces of something I couldn't identify clinging to the rails. But no Mitch. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I backed away, stumbling, and fell onto the damp grass. My hands were shaking. It didn't make sense. Where the hell was he? There was no body, no sign of anything whole. Just remnants. I called it in, barely able to string together a coherent sentence. The supervisor arrived first, then security. They shut down the park for the day, obviously. Cops swarmed the place soon after, combing through every inch of the area. They found pieces, bits of flesh, part of a shoe, his headphones tangled in the weeds a few yards away. But no Mitch, at least not all of him. The investigators concluded he must have been working too close to the tracks, his music drowning out the sound of the coaster. They said the train hit him so fast, so violently, that it was impossible to recover everything. The force must have thrown pieces of him in all directions. That's what they said. But something about it didn't sit right. The Thunder Beast wasn't running full speed during dry runs. And even at its fastest, the trajectory didn't match up. The way his remains were scattered, it was like something else happened. Something I couldn't explain. The following week was hell. They brought in grief counselors, but what could they really say? Sorry you watched a man get obliterated on your shift? The park reopened quickly. Too quickly, if you ask me. Management wanted to sweep it under the rug, act like nothing had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about Mitch, his headphones, the way he worked like he was in his own little world. Did he see it coming? Did he feel it? Or was it over before he knew what hit him? I started having nightmares, the kind that jolt you awake, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. In them, I'd hear the Thunder Beast roaring down the track, but when I looked, the cars were empty, blood-streaked, and the scream, that metallic, grinding scream, wasn't from the coaster. It was something else, something alive. I quit a month later. Couldn't take it anymore. Story 3. The Roar in the Dark. I still remember that week like it was yesterday. Back in 2011, I was working at downtown Disney, a lively, bustling place full of color and chatter. It wasn't the kind of place where eerie thoughts lingered. It was safe, familiar. But one week, out of the blue, I was deployed to Dinoland, USA at Animal Kingdom. They needed extra hands, and I thought, why not? It's just for a few days. What I didn't know was that those days would leave me with a memory that I can't shake, no matter how many years go by. Dinoland felt different from downtown Disney. Sure, during the day, it was a quirky, fun-themed area, bright colors, carnival games, families laughing. But at night, it was another world. My shifts often ended after park hours, so by the time I was clocking out, the crowds were gone, and the only sounds were distant footsteps of other staff heading out or the hum of maintenance crews working late. That last night, though, my last night at Dinoland, something changed. I stayed later than usual, helping clean up after a mechanical issue at one of the rides. By the time I wrapped up, it was almost midnight, and the entire park was eerily quiet. I grabbed my things and started walking toward the front entrance. Normally, I'd join others, but that night, I seemed to be the last one out. It was darker than usual, too. The park had some lights along the pathways, but they were dim, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted in unnatural ways. The jungle-like surroundings of Animal Kingdom loomed around me, the trees rustling with unseen movements. I told myself it was just the wind. I followed the path I thought led to the front, but after a few minutes, I realized something was off. The familiar landmarks, the bridge, the concession stand, were missing. I stopped and looked around, trying to orient myself. That's when I heard it, a low growl. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. My first thought was that it was part of the sound system. After all, this was Dinoland. They played ambient noises of dinosaurs all the time. But why would it still be on this late? And why did it sound so real? I quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing on the concrete path. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. It was just nerves, just a long day getting to me. But then I heard it again, louder. This time it wasn't a growl, it was a roar, deep, guttural, and primal. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely steady. "Is someone there?" Silence. I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight, but the battery was almost dead. The dim glow barely pierced the darkness. I took a deep breath and started walking faster, convincing myself it was just a recording left on by accident. As I rounded a corner, I saw something move in the shadows, a shape. It was quick, too quick for me to make out, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Who's there?" No answer. I thought about turning back, retracing my steps, but I didn't want to be in this place any longer than I had to. I kept going, my heart pounding in my chest. The path took me past the entrance to the dinosaur ride. The building loomed like a dark, gaping mouth, its sign unlit and foreboding. I swore I saw movement near the entrance, something slipping into the shadows, but when I shone my weak flashlight, there was nothing. Then I heard footsteps, not mine. They were heavy, deliberate, and coming from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand, but there was no one there. The footsteps stopped too, as if whoever or whatever it was had frozen the moment I turned. "Okay, this isn't funny," I said, my voice cracking. "If this is some kind of joke, you got me, ha." The footsteps started again, this time faster. They weren't coming toward me. They were circling me. My throat went dry. I couldn't move. And then I heard it, breathing. Deep, raspy breathing, so close it felt like it was right next to me. I swung the flashlight around wildly, but the weak beam revealed nothing. "Stop it!" I yelled, my voice echoing into the emptiness. Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted, so loud it made my chest vibrate. I dropped my phone in shock, the light going out as it hit the ground. I scrambled to pick it up, but the screen stayed black. I was plunged into darkness. The breathing grew louder, closer. I ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burning with every breath. I could hear it behind me, footsteps pounding, the growl rising into another roar. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was real. The path twisted and turned, and I barely avoided tripping over a curb. My mind raced as fast as my legs. What the hell was this? An animal that escaped? Some cruel prank? I saw a light in the distance, a lamppost near the main entrance. I pushed myself harder, my muscles screaming in protest. The footsteps behind me grew fainter, the roar fading into the distance. When I finally reached the lamppost, I collapsed under it, gasping for air. I looked back into the darkness, expecting to see something emerge, but there was nothing. I stayed there for what felt like hours, my eyes fixed on the path, waiting for any sign of movement. When I finally felt brave enough to move, I made my way to the security station near the entrance. The guard on duty looked up, startled. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I lied, trying to catch my breath. "I think I got turned around." He nodded sympathetically. "That happens sometimes. This place is like a maze after dark." I didn't tell him what I'd heard or seen. What could I say? That a dinosaur was chasing me? He'd think I was crazy. I never went back to Dinoland after that. Story 4, I used to work as a sound technician at Six Flags, spending most of my shifts behind the scenes, tinkering with equipment, or setting up audio for the various shows and events. It was never a glamorous job, but it paid well. And honestly, I loved being around the chaos of it all. The energy of the park, the actors in their ridiculous costumes, the frantic rush of performers getting into character. But there was always something unsettling about the backstage area, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't the actors or the staff. Most of them were fine. But there was an atmosphere in the air that didn't sit right. It was late one night, long after the park had closed, and I was in the sound booth, finishing up the final adjustments for a Halloween event. The park was almost eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every little noise sound louder than it actually is. I was just about to grab my bag and head out when I got a message on the intercom. The voice crackling over the speaker was one of the stage managers, but the tone of their voice was strange, urgent, almost frantic. "Hey, could you do me a favor? There's a situation backstage in the character area. Could you go check on something for me?" I remember thinking it was a little odd. The characters were supposed to be in their dressing rooms or already packed up by then, but I didn't question it. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the backstage area. The hallways were dark, the usual overhead lights flickering. It's a maze back there. Twisting corridors, narrow spaces, and rooms filled with props and costumes. I knew these hallways like the back of my hand, but tonight, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I rounded a corner and came to the character dressing room area. The door was slightly ajar, the low hum of the air conditioning the only sound. I knocked softly on the door frame, but there was no answer. Pushing it open, I stepped inside. What I saw next, I still can't fully process. In the middle of the room stood two figures. At first, I thought they were just actors in costume, but then the reality hit me. These were not actors. Bugs Bunny and Scooby-Doo, or at least their costumes. Their heads were nowhere to be seen, just their bodies standing there, like lifeless mannequins. But there was something wrong, very wrong. I froze. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I could hear the faint sound of fabric moving, shuffling. I couldn't look away. I swear, time slowed down in that moment. Then it hit me. The movement wasn't just from the costumes, the bodies inside them. They were moving. Scooby-Doo's body was pressed against Bugs Bunny's, both of them engaged. The costumes were still zipped up halfway, but the figures, the actors, or whatever they were, had completely stripped down beneath the fabric, caught in some horrible, inhuman act. The sound of it was like something out of a nightmare, a mixture of muffled grunts and the sickening shuffle of fabric. I don't even know how long I stood there, my mind trying desperately to catch up with the horror unfolding in front of me. But in that moment, everything felt too real, too tangible. I could smell something, musty, like sweat, in the odd, acrid scent of latex. The headless costumes hung loosely around their necks like discarded husks, and the figures, human, animal, whatever they were grinding against each other, oblivious to my presence. I turned away, my breath catching in my throat, my heart pounding in my ears. My hand was shaking as I reached for my phone to call security, but something stopped me. It was the silence, not the absence of sound, the presence of it. Like someone was standing behind me, watching, waiting. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. One of the actors, or maybe not. It was hard to say because it didn't sound human. The voice was low and grating, like something trying to mimic speech but failing. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I just turned and ran. I heard the footsteps behind me as I sprinted down the hall, each step echoing like a drum beat in the stillness. The low hum of the air conditioning had been replaced with the sound of heavy breathing, like someone or something was right on my tail. But when I dared to glance over my shoulder, there was nothing, just empty hallways. Yet the feeling lingered, that presence, that cold, creeping sensation that something was still following me, just beyond sight. I burst into the main area, the lights flickering to life, and I made a beeline for the sound booth, not caring about the equipment anymore, not caring about anything but getting the hell out of there. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the keys to the control room. The door slammed shut behind me, and I collapsed into the chair trying to gather myself. I couldn't stop shaking. Minutes passed, maybe longer, but nothing else happened. No one came to check on me. No one asked about the characters. It was like it never happened. I left that night, too terrified to speak to anyone, too scared to even go back to the parking lot. But I couldn't shake the image of those costumes. I never went backstage again. No matter how much they begged me to come back for just one more show, I stayed away. I never told anyone what I saw. It's like it didn't exist, but I know what I saw, and I'm never going to forget it. Story 5. I'm not sure how to begin this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe telling someone will help me make sense of what happened, but I'm not sure it's something you can really understand unless you were there. It was the summer of 2015. I had just turned 18 and I needed a job. I lived in a small town, the kind where everybody knows everyone and everything is familiar and safe. Too safe. So when I landed a summer gig at what seemed like a decent, if run-down, theme park on the edge of town, I thought I was in for an easy season. It wasn't some shiny, high-tech park with roller coasters that looped through the clouds. No, it was old, real old. But there was something nostalgic about it, something that made it feel like it was a different time altogether. The place was called Starview Gardens, and it had been a family-owned amusement park for decades. It had been a lot bigger in the 50s, I'd heard. But by the time I worked there, it was just hanging on by a thread. The rides were rusty, the lights flickered, and the staff seemed like they were all just going through the motions. I was stationed at the ticket booth, taking money from tourists and giving them wristbands that meant nothing more than a token of their time spent in a place past its prime. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was easy, and I wasn't complaining. One of my co-workers was a guy named Jesse. He was in his late 20s with shaggy brown hair and this look in his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. The weird thing about him was that no one ever really knew where he was from. He didn't talk much about his past, and he just didn't seem to fit in with anyone. Most of the people working there were teenagers like me, just trying to scrape by. But Jesse, he was different, quiet, odd, and always seemed like he was waiting for something. It was the middle of the afternoon, a hot, sticky July day, and I was sitting behind the ticket booth when Jesse came walking past. I noticed him looking at the old wooden roller coaster, the Wild Wind they called it. It hadn't worked properly in years. The cars would screech and wobble, and if you got on it, you'd probably regret it. "Hey Jesse, you good?" I called out to him, leaning on the counter. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring at the coaster. His face was blank, almost emotionless. Then after what felt like forever, he turned toward me, his eyes wide, and said something I'll never forget. "Something's wrong with the tracks. It's not right." I didn't know what he meant by that. It was just an old ride, right? Nothing unusual about it, other than the fact it was falling apart. I shrugged it off. "Yeah, it's ancient. It probably needs to be retired," I said, trying to keep things light. "But you know how it is. They'll fix it. Eventually." Jesse didn't respond. He just kept staring at the coaster, like he was waiting for something to happen. I remember thinking, he's probably just tired. Too much sun. But I could see something was eating at him. The next part is hard to talk about. I still don't fully understand it. It was a few hours later, and the park was getting busy. Families, kids running around with cotton candy, parents too tired to even care. I was working at the booth when I heard a scream. It wasn't one of those normal screams you hear at a theme park, the "yay, I'm on a ride" scream. This was different. It was sharp, desperate, like something had gone horribly wrong. I froze. My stomach twisted into a knot. The scream came from the direction of the Wild Wind. Before I could even move, there was another scream, and then a loud thud, followed by silence. I ran toward the sound. My heart was pounding, and it felt like the air around me had gotten thicker, harder to breathe. When I turned the corner, I saw a group of people gathered around, pointing, some of them crying. It wasn't until I pushed through the crowd that I saw what had happened. Jesse was lying there, right in front of the roller coaster, motionless. It wasn't a simple accident. I knew that immediately. His body had been crushed. His limbs were bent in unnatural angles, his face twisted into an expression of pain I've never seen before. There was no sign of blood, though. It wasn't like a normal accident. The weirdest part, the roller coaster wasn't even running. A few of the employees rushed to his side, but it was obvious he was already gone. One of them, the supervisor, I think, was talking to someone on the radio, calling for an ambulance. But no one moved Jesse's body. They just stood there, frozen, like they didn't know what to do. I felt this chill run down my spine, like the air had suddenly gone cold. And that's when I heard it, a soft voice, barely audible, from behind me. "Did you see it?" I turned, and there was one of the ride attendants, a young girl named Hannah. She looked like she was in shock, eyes wide, pupils dilated. "Did you see what he did?" she repeated, but her voice wasn't right, almost like it wasn't her speaking. I shook my head, not sure what she meant. "What are you talking about?" But she wasn't looking at me anymore. Her eyes were fixed on Jesse, and then she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't catch it. He knew. He knew it was coming. I stepped back, confused, my mind racing. What did she mean? What had Jesse known? Then I saw it, the tracks, the ones Jesse had been staring at earlier. They were wrong. There was something about them, something off, like the wood had splintered in a way that didn't make sense. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. There was something else on the tracks, something I couldn't explain, something that shouldn't have been there, a shadow creeping along the rails, moving in a way that didn't match the light. It wasn't a person, but it felt like a presence, something malicious, something that wasn't supposed to be part of this world. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone, like it never existed. I never spoke to anyone about it after that day. Not really. Everyone just brushed it off as a horrible accident. But deep down, I know Jesse saw something. He knew what was going to happen. And whatever it wasn't just a ride malfunction. It was something worse. Maybe he dove in front of the coaster because he thought he could stop it. Maybe he thought it would save the kids. Maybe he thought he could warn us. But he didn't. Story 6, The Haunting at Retroland. I've never believed in ghosts, but what happened that night at Retroland, I'm not sure what to believe anymore. It all started a few weeks ago. A kid from my class, some guy who liked to act like he knew everything, came up to me and my friends and started talking about Retroland. He was that kind of guy. Always had something to say, always knew the truth. He swore up and down that the place was haunted, that at night when the park was empty, there was a phantom that roamed the grounds. A phantom that would drag you into the shadows if you weren't careful. We laughed him off, of course. Haunted? Yeah, right, we said. Who the hell still believed in that stuff? But he insisted it was true, swore he'd seen it with his own eyes, said there were stories of strange noises, figures in the dark, people disappearing. Bullshit, I said. Prove it then, he challenged. I wasn't about to back down from a challenge. Neither were my friends, so we decided to go check it out, see for ourselves if Retroland really was haunted. Maybe we'd find something, maybe we wouldn't. Either way, we'd have a laugh at his expense. That night, we snuck into the park after hours. It was late, too late for anyone to be around, and the place was empty, quiet. It was eerie even. The park had been abandoned for years, but the rides and signs still stood there, a decaying reminder of what used to be. The Ferris wheel towered over the place like some kind of giant, looming presence. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rust and old popcorn. We wandered around the grounds for a while, laughing and joking, not really taking the whole thing seriously. But then, around the back of the old roller coaster, we heard something. A noise, a scraping sound, like metal against stone. We froze. "Did you hear that?" one of my friends whispered. "Probably just an animal," I said, trying to brush it off. But something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. We crept toward the sound, the dark of the park swallowing us whole. It was hard to see anything in the dim light, but I swore I saw a figure, something moving in the distance. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered. Before I could even think, a maniac, dressed in all black, with a hood and a long cloak, burst out of nowhere. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. He was close, too close. His eyes, those eyes, were wide and crazed. He let out a laugh, high-pitched and almost maniacal. "Gotcha!" the figure shouted. I nearly shit myself. We all freaked out, running in different directions, hearts racing. But then, the maniac started laughing, like he knew exactly what he was doing. The laugh echoed through the empty park, too loud, too familiar. I stopped panting, turning to see who it was. It was just two kids from our class, the ones who overheard us earlier. They were laughing their asses off, rolling around on the ground. The bastard had been messing with us the whole time. We let out a collective groan of frustration. "Seriously? You guys scared the shit out of us for this?" I said, shaking my head. "You guys should have seen your faces," one of them said, still laughing. I was pissed, but we all knew that they'd had their fun. Whatever. It wasn't worth getting worked up over. We kept going, though, determined to finish the night out and put the whole haunting to rest. But then, it happened again. We were walking past the old carousel when another figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking our path. "Not this time," I muttered, rolling my eyes. But when the figure turned to face us, my blood ran cold. It was the same damn outfit, the black cloak, the hood, just like the one the first kid had been wearing. But this time, I could see more clearly. The cloak moved too unnaturally, like it was being blown by wind that wasn't there. And the eyes were wide open, too wide. The figure's face was pale, almost sickly with no expression. We froze again, hearts pounding in our chests. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't funny anymore. "Who the hell are you?" one of my friends demanded. But the figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised its arms in a slow, deliberate motion, like it was preparing to reach out and grab us. We backed away, the panic setting in. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure was gone, vanished into the darkness like smoke. We didn't waste any time. We started running, our footsteps pounding on the pavement as we made our way toward the exit. We were done. No more jokes. This shit wasn't funny. But as we neared the gates, something or someone stepped out in front of us again. Not again, I breathed. It was the same figure, but this time, it wasn't just standing there. It was moving toward us, walking slowly, purposefully. We backed up, desperate now, but the figure kept coming. "Come on, man, this isn't funny," I shouted. We reached out, trying to grab the cloak to pull it off. We were done with the whole game. But when we yanked at the fabric, it didn't pull the way it should have. There was no person inside, no body, no head, just a fleshy, grotesque thing that shouldn't have existed. I can't describe it. It was like something out of a nightmare. A body, but not a body. A twisted mass of flesh, all tangled and wrong. And the thing, it screamed. This horrible, blood-curdling scream that echoed through the park, making my teeth rattle. The salami, what the fuck was that? Wrapped around its legs, slapping against the ground with each step. It smelled like rot. We couldn't move. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. It felt unreal, but it was right there, in front of us, real. We ran. We ran faster than I've ever run in my life, bursting through the gates and onto the street outside. We didn't stop until we were back at my house, panting, shaking, still not believing what had just happened. I haven't been back to Retroland since. I don't think I ever will. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a ghost. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't something you wanted to mess with. Story 7, I used to work at Six Flags, back in the day when Big Bad Wolf was still running. On this particular day, the park was quiet. So quiet I could almost hear the hum of the world outside. It wasn't uncommon for things to slow down during off-peak seasons, and on this shift, my area manager pulled me aside to help out the park's cleaning crew in a different part of the park. Usually it was just some light sweeping, maybe tossing a stray napkin in the trash here and there. It was a good way to kill time, especially on a slow day. I didn't mind it at all. I liked walking around, taking in the sights. The park was always well kept. Sure, you'd get the occasional inconsiderate mess from the guests, but even that wasn't too bad. It was mostly harmless, if not a bit annoying. But what happened that day? That's something I don't think I'll ever forget. I was moving through the park, taking my time, when I got the radio call. "Head to the men's bathroom at the German Fest House," the voice crackled over the speaker. "We need some help in there." I didn't think much of it. Sometimes there were issues with the trash overflow in the stalls or toilet paper on the ground. Standard stuff. It wasn't uncommon to be called in for that. It wasn't glamorous, but it was part of the job. I made my way over, taking the usual route, and as I approached the German Fest House area, I could already smell something off. The air had a faint tang. Not something you usually notice, but it was there, hanging in the air. I thought it was just the usual mix of fried foods and summer heat, but then I stepped closer to the bathroom. The smell hit me full force. It was thick, nauseating, sharp. It wasn't just a bad bathroom smell. It was something worse, something metallic and bitter. I immediately felt my stomach tighten. I pushed the door open and took a few steps in. The lights flickered above, casting a dim yellowish glow over everything. There was nothing too unusual about the scene at first, just the usual mess. The kind of mess you expect from people who don't care. A bit of toilet paper on the floor, a few dirty towels tossed about. Nothing to scream about, nothing that would make me want to turn around and leave. But the smell was getting worse. I walked through the restroom, heading past the stalls. At first I didn't see anything that alarming, but the further I went in, the stronger the stench became. It was almost suffocating. I started to feel dizzy. I felt like I could taste it in the back of my throat, like it was clinging to my skin. And then I reached the last stall, the handicap stall. I paused for a moment, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just the smell anymore. It was the air in the room, thick and oppressive. I don't know what it was, but it was like the atmosphere itself was off, as if something was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I pushed the door open, almost against my better judgment, and that's when I saw it. It was wrong. That's all I could think. It was wrong. In that stall was a mess. No, not a mess. It was an absolute nightmare. A sick, twisted piece of artwork, but not in the way you'd expect. This wasn't anything you could explain away. Not a simple act of vandalism, not a bathroom joke. What I saw was a series of shapes. They were crude, jagged, something that looked like horses, arrows, strange animalistic figures, all drawn in human feces. I don't know what kind of mind creates something like that, but I do know that I've never felt a wave of pure terror like I did in that moment. It was everywhere, across the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. These twisted symbols that had no right being in a public restroom, no right being anywhere. It was like someone had tried to leave a message, an imprint, and I couldn't begin to understand what it meant or why they had done it. I stepped back, feeling the bile rise in my throat. I had to get out. I couldn't stay in there any longer. I turned to leave, but then something made me pause. A noise, a soft scraping sound. I looked back at the stall, heart pounding in my chest. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something shift in the corner of my vision. Something in the dark. But when I looked directly at it, it was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran. I made it out into the open air, gasping for breath. I stumbled a few feet away before I couldn't hold it in anymore. I threw up, hard. The smell, the images, they were stuck in my head. I couldn't even think straight. It was like I was in some sort of fog. I barely managed to radio in. I need backup at the German Fest house, I said, my voice shaky, barely above a whisper. The bathroom, it's bad, like really bad. Out of order. I didn't wait for a response. I slapped the out of order sign on the door and stepped back. I didn't look at the stall again. I couldn't. I don't even know why I went in there to begin with. I wasn't trained for whatever that was. None of us were. I don't know what happened in that bathroom. I don't know who did that or why, but I know this. It wasn't just some prank. That thing I saw, that sick, twisted piece of artwork, it was something else. Something I still don't understand, and I'm pretty sure I'm better off not trying to. I left that area as quickly as I could, trying to forget the images burned into my mind, and I don't think I'd be able to handle that. Not again. Not after what I saw. Story 8. I used to work at a water park, graduation parties mostly. High school kids, a mix of excitement and chaos. It was a good gig. I was one of the people responsible for keeping things running smoothly, making sure everyone was safe, keeping an eye on the kids, just the usual stuff. But the night I'm about to tell you, that was different. I don't know what happened, but it's still fresh in my mind. I swear I can still hear the sounds. It was one of those nights, you know? Warm air, the kind of night where the water slides glisten under the fluorescent lights, and the sounds of laughter echo from every direction. The place was alive with energy, mostly from the high school kids, fresh out of graduation, ready to party all night. I wasn't too involved in the activities, just keeping an eye on things. That's what I did. This one kid, though, stood out. Never saw him before. Tall, a little scruffy, the kind of kid who looked like he was trying to be part of something bigger than himself. He had this sort of wild energy about him, like he was always a second away from doing something reckless. I heard the whispers. He had some drugs on him. What kind? I'm not sure, but you could see it in his eyes, that look, the one that says, "I'm out of control." The party was in full swing, kids running around, eating snacks, racing down the water slides. It was mostly harmless until it wasn't. A hypnotist was supposed to be the big show for the night, a part of the all-night party, you know? I thought, great, another cheesy act. But they had hired someone who apparently knew what they were doing. The crowd was already hyped up, and when the hypnotist stepped onto the stage, the room went quiet. That's when I saw him, the kid I was talking about. He was at the edge of the crowd, still looking a little out of place, but clearly intrigued. His eyes darted around and then, without warning, he started walking toward the stage. The whole crowd followed his movements. Everyone thought he was just getting into it, getting ready to volunteer. But I knew something was off. As the hypnotist did his thing, telling people to relax, focus on his voice, the kid was right there at the front, looking like he was in another world. I watched him for a moment. His hands were twitching, like he couldn't control them. His eyes were glassy. And then, he dropped to his knees. It was like a switch flipped. His body went stiff, his eyes rolled back. And then, he started shaking. Hard, violently. I couldn't tell if it was the drugs or the hypnosis or some combination of both. But it didn't feel right. His entire body was convulsing. His arms twitched like they were fighting against something inside him. The hypnotist didn't seem to notice at first. He was too busy with the rest of the crowd, pulling people into the trance. But the kid wasn't having it. "Get him out of here," I yelled to one of the staff. But no one moved fast enough. He started jerking around like a puppet, his limbs all wrong, his neck contorted at odd angles. It looked like his body was fighting against itself, like it was trying to break free of something. I've seen people have seizures before, but this wasn't like that. This was something else. His mouth was open, but no sound came out, just the odd jerking noises. His breathing came in short, frantic gasps. Some of the kids in the crowd started laughing at first. They thought it was part of the show, a big joke. But the laughter quickly died when the kid's body snapped in a way it shouldn't have. His back arched and his head tilted back at a horrible angle. His eyes were wide open. And then, the sound of his teeth grinding. It was sharp, like nails on a chalkboard. I don't know how to explain it, but there was something in the air, something thick. Like the world had stopped, but everything around us was still moving. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I rushed to the stage. The hypnotist was still oblivious. Some of the kids were screaming now, but it was like no one could move. I don't even remember how I got there, but I was at the kid's side, pulling him away from the crowd. He was limp now, his body still shaking, his eyes staring into nothing. He was like a rag doll. I grabbed his shoulders and shook him, hoping he would snap out of it, but there was no response. He was gone. "Someone help!" I shouted, but there was chaos. People were scattering now, the other kids running away from the stage, some crying, others too stunned to move. But the kid, he was out cold. His body had gone completely slack, his breath shallow. I could hear his heart beating, but it was slow, too slow. That's when I realized it wasn't a show. It wasn't part of the act. Whatever had happened to him wasn't just drugs. It wasn't just hypnosis. It was something worse. I don't know how much time passed before the paramedics arrived, but it felt like forever. They tried to revive him, but when they lifted him onto the stretcher, his body flopped like a rag doll again. And I swear, I'll never forget it. His eyes stayed wide open, frozen, empty. He didn't blink. They rushed him to the hospital. The last I heard, he was in critical condition, but no one really knew what happened to him. I heard rumors, people talking about the kid's brain being fried, like the drugs had pushed him too far into whatever trance the hypnotist had put him in. Some said he'd been broken in some way, like he'd never come back to who he was before. Others thought it was some kind of possession, but I don't believe in that crap. The party? It ended that night. The whole place shut down. No one knew what to say or what to do. It was like everything had just stopped. I don't talk about it much. Don't think I ever will again. Story 9. It was a typical summer day at Cedar Point, one of those days where the air was thick with the scent of fresh popcorn and the sounds of excited screams mixed with the whir of roller coasters in motion. I had never been one to shy away from the chaos of an amusement park, but that day, it felt like something was different. It wasn't until I stood at the entrance of the chaos ride that I felt that strange, unsettling itch on the back of my neck, a feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. I'd been standing there waiting for a few minutes when a man and his son had just gotten on the ride before me. They were in a rush, a little too eager to get on, and the man looked like he had barely finished his lunch. He was still wearing his sunglasses, his cap pulled low, and his son had that wide-eyed excitement typical of kids that had never seen a roller coaster before. What caught my eye, though, was the camera. The man had set his video camera on the operator's booth, probably hoping to capture some footage of his son's ride without risking it flying off the roller coaster and into the abyss. I didn't think much of it at first. Who hasn't done something like that? But little did I know that small act of convenience would lead to a chain of events that would scar me for life. As I stood there, nervously shifting my weight from one foot to the other, a feeling of unease washed over me. Something in the air, something in the way the crowd shifted. I couldn't explain it, but it was there. That nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, I shouldn't have gotten in line for chaos at all. The ride started up, and I watched as the operator, a young woman in her 20s with blonde hair tied into a messy bun, walked over to the camera. It seemed like a harmless decision at first. She picked it up and pointed it at the cars just as the ride was about to begin. It was like she had that moment of inspiration, thinking that it'd be a nice souvenir for the family, but she had no idea what was about to unfold. The coaster took off, jerking violently as it always did, the cars spinning wildly and lifting into the air. It was a thrill, no doubt, but not for everyone. About halfway through the ride, I could hear something strange. The sounds of the ride, the screaming, the whirling, all seemed to fade out for a moment. And then it came, a low, gut-wrenching noise like someone was struggling to breathe, followed by a sharp, splashing sound. At first, I thought it was part of the ride's effects, some dramatic soundbite maybe, but as I glanced at the screen of the camera, I could see it. There it was, the man in the front seat, face pale as death, gripping the safety bar as if his life depended on it. And then, with no warning, he lost it. The whole scene unfolded in a sickening blur as his stomach revolted in a horrific explosion of vomit. It wasn't just a small spill, it was a torrent, an unrelenting cascade of liquids that seemed to come from a place that shouldn't have been possible. The camera captured it all, his body jerking, his eyes wide in panic, the unmistakable sounds of his stomach rejecting everything he'd eaten. I froze. I wasn't sure what to do. No one around me seemed to notice, too caught up in their own world or maybe too distracted by the rush of the ride. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The camera kept rolling. I watched, horrified, as the operator behind the booth seemed to finally realize what was happening. Her face twisted with disbelief, and for a moment, there was a stunned silence. She quickly turned the camera away from the man, but the damage was done. His entire ordeal, every last drop of it, was on film. I thought it was over. I thought that surely someone would say something, but no. As the ride slowed to a stop, the operator quietly tucked the camera back into its original spot on the booth, as if nothing had happened. The man, utterly embarrassed, was clearly shaken, though he tried his best to hide it. He wiped his mouth, muttered an apology to his son, and gathered his things. His hands were trembling, his face flushed with shame. I couldn't look away. It wasn't until the man and his son had disembarked and walked off the platform that I realized something even more disturbing. The operators didn't say a word, not one. They just went about their jobs, smiling, checking the restraints on the next batch of riders, and acting like nothing unusual had occurred. I didn't know what to think. Was this some kind of sick joke? Had the operators seen something more? Did they know the ride had captured that moment? That gagging, violent display of human misery? My stomach turned at the thought, but there was no time to ask. I had to get on the ride. I didn't want to, not anymore, but I had no choice. As I boarded the chaos ride and strapped myself in, I kept replaying that moment in my head, over and over. The man's face, the sound, the camera, that feeling in the pit of my stomach that something wasn't right. The ride began, jerking into motion once more. The wind whipped around me and I screamed along with the others. But something was different. The rush, the thrill, the excitement, it felt hollow, like the sound of the screams that echoed in my ears were not my own, but someone else's. The image of that man's face, the horror, the disgust, the resignation, lingered. When the ride ended, I couldn't get off fast enough. My legs were shaking and my head was spinning. I was disoriented, confused, and all I could think about was the camera, the man's camera. What if he didn't know? What if he never saw the footage? But it wasn't until that night, back at my hotel room, when I overheard a conversation in the lobby that chilled me to my bones. A family had been there standing around the front desk, and I overheard the father's voice, a voice that sounded exactly like the man from the Chaos ride. "I swear I didn't record that," he was saying, his voice shaking. "I didn't mean for that to happen." And then I heard it. "I can't believe it. It's all on film," he whispered. "My kids saw it. They saw me. They saw everything." My heart sank. The family had watched the footage together, and the father had no idea. He didn't remember it happening, but the footage didn't lie. The ride, the camera, the barfing. It was all there for everyone to see. That was the moment I knew. The party had been canceled, and I would never forget that man's face, pale with horror, as the camera rolled on. Story 10. It was an ordinary shift at Universal, or at least that's what I thought. I had worked on Dueling Dragons for months, but this day would change everything. I was stationed at one of the loading bays, checking restraints, making sure the ride ops did their checks, and keeping everything running smoothly. The sun was relentless that day, but the air was still thick with excitement, the kind of energy you only get when people are about to get launched into the air at ridiculous speeds. You've probably heard of Dueling Dragons. It was two intertwined roller coasters, each one twisting and flipping like some kind of vicious mechanical serpent. The whole point was that they dueled. The two tracks would come incredibly close to each other at high speeds. You could hear the roar of both coasters as they rocketed around, feeling the vibration of their proximity. People loved it, but the thrill of it. I knew the danger, even if the riders didn't. We were always telling people to empty their pockets before riding. Phones, keys, anything that could go flying. People would listen, but they'd always slip in that one item that could hurt someone. We'd make announcements over the speakers, but you could only do so much. After all, the rush of the ride was enough to make anyone forget the rules. It happened so fast, I barely even processed what was happening until it was too late. One moment, I was standing there, checking my clipboard, making sure the harnesses were secure on the next group of riders. Then, the next moment, the sound of the coasters collided with a sickening thud, like metal against flesh. The ride went dead silent, and that silence, it felt unnatural, like the air itself had been sucked out. For a split second, I thought it was just a malfunction, a random glitch in the system. But then the voice on the radio crackled. "We've got an incident. The ride's down. We need help now." There was a rush of movement around me as staff scrambled to assess the situation. I didn't know what was going on yet, but it didn't take long to figure it out. One of the riders had been struck. I could hear the muffled voices over the radio, and I started to piece things together. Some kind of projectile, something from a pocket, had flown out of a rider's pants and struck another passenger on the opposite coaster. The projectile was a handful of change, loose coins. I walked over to the emergency area, trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding. As I reached the crowd of people gathered around the scene, I saw him, this man, standing dazed, a hand clutching his face. He wasn't crying or screaming, but the look on his face was enough to freeze my blood. His right eye was red, but it was the left one that made my stomach churn. It was completely blank. "His eye," I heard someone whisper. "It's gone." I turned away, not wanting to get too close. The guy had been hit with a coin, right in the eye, and it did the unthinkable. They were rushing him to the medical center, but it was clear. It was bad. What I didn't know, what no one knew until later, was that he had already been blind in his other eye. That hit, that random, careless mistake, had robbed him of what little vision he had left, and just like that, his life changed forever. As I walked back toward the ride's entrance, I saw the other guests looking confused, anxious, some murmuring among themselves. I wanted to tell them everything was fine, but I didn't even know if I believed it myself. It felt like a mistake, like this wasn't supposed to happen. I'll never forget the way the ride ops and the maintenance crew looked when they realized what had gone down. I overheard them saying something about how the coins should never have gotten that far. They were supposed to have checked to make sure no one had anything that could fly out, but something had slipped through the cracks. What's worse is that after everything happened, Universal shut down the dueling feature. No more close calls, no more near misses. Just two separate static coasters. They kept the ride open, but it wasn't the same. It was a dull version of what it used to be. No duels, no danger, no thrill. They made sure to reassure people that the ride was still safe now, but the magic was gone. The excitement had been killed. For a while after the accident, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just bad luck, like the ride itself had been cursed. I kept thinking about that guy, his blank eyes. It was the kind of thing that sticks with you, eats at you in the quiet moments when you're alone. His eye was gone, but somehow, I felt like part of me had been taken too. There was a lingering sense of wrongness in the air. It felt like we were living with a ghost now, one that wasn't just haunting the ride, but everyone who worked there. That guy, the one who lost his sight, I never saw him again. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.